Welcome to the Fantasy Formula One podcast, where we use fake money to buy real F1 teams to win imaginary points.
That was smooth.
Man, I'm getting so good
That
at
was
this.
solid. I liked it.
I am Paul. That is Ben.
How's it going?
If you're listening to the comments on social media, the big question to speculate about is if I actually know what I'm talking about when it comes to Formula 2. So one of the reels we posted, I was talking about the difference between Formula 2 and IndyCar.
So I think the statement that you made last week was, oh, IndyCar and Formula 2 is very, very similar, except IndyCar doesn't have the hybrid components that a Formula 2 car has.
Yep,
that's where the comment sharks kind of came in. And thank you for commenting.
Yes.
Thanks for keeping us honest, because we don't know everything about everything, and we're a little smarter today than we were before, and that's thanks to you guys. Formula 2 has, the cars have naturally aspirated engines. They are not hybrid cars. And so appreciate your bravery in facing the scandal head on.
Yeah.
I know a lot of people would have tried to bury that, but
right.
You know
I'm
what?
not involved in the politics.
No,
you
face the truth. Well done.
And that's one of the things I love about this podcast. If you are new to this podcast, you and I are both former military officers. We specialize in search and rescue.
Yeah.
And we're focusing on the fantasy aspect of F1.
The power rankings came out yesterday at 11 a.m.
Okay.
Ranking the top 10 drivers at this point in the season.
Okay.
And that was, a lot of it was very, very straightforward, but there were a couple surprises for me. So I'll just run down the list real quick.
Let's do it.
Max Verstappen is number 1. That shouldn't be any surprise.
Oh my gosh.
So no, Max Verstappen, he's won 5. He won the first. He had 5 victories in the first 7 races.
He's won 7 so far.
So he's still got a healthy lead. From the drivers' championship perspective right now. The advantages that he has had purely from a car engineering perspective are gone, but he's still Max Verstappen, and he still built up a really, really comfortable lead with that early momentum that they had. So no surprises there. Number 2 is Lando Norris. We've seen the continued ascent of McLaren. No surprise there. Number 3, Oscar Piastri. I don't know if I would have called him number 3 necessarily, but his performance has continued to at least be consistent, if not improve from week to week. 4, we have George Russell, which some people might raise some eyebrows initially, but to have George Russell higher than Lewis on this list.
Russell, man, he's earned that Mercedes uniform he's wearing.
Oh,
he's
certainly.
Doing great.
Yeah,
so I like the fact. I actually like how recency George Russell's above Lewis Hamilton there. I think that's, for right now where we're at in F1. I think that's accurate.
No, I would agree. Then they got Charles Leclerc and then Carlos Sainz grouped side by side. So yeah, both really solid. In 7th, you've got Lewis Hamilton. I think you give it a few more weeks, he's going to jump a couple spots. 8th, they actually put Nico Hülkenberg, which tracks for me as well. Haas has had a surprisingly solid year, and I think you can rest that hat mostly on Nico Hülkenberg's consistent performance. Number 9, they got Yuki Tsunoda. I'm glad there's some recognition of his consistency and his performance this year. He's been solid, and he's been reliable both as a driver and as a fantasy F1 performer as well.
Yeah.
Number 10 surprises me because they put Alex Albon for Williams as the number 10 the number 10 driver out of all eligible drivers so far this year. We have a total absence from Kick Sauber, which is no surprise. Total absence from Aston Martin in the top 10.
Which is very surprising, given that they have a former world champion on their team.
But who has been very up and down.
Yes, he's been very gambling. He's taken a lot of the chances this season.
But again, Alex Albon, he hasn't done anything too remarkable in my mind. Would you not put Sergio Perez above Alex Albon this year? So that one just surprised me.
That.
Yeah.
I'm surprised by that. I really am. The fact that you can put in both McLarens, both Ferraris, both Mercedes, and not put in both Red Bulls.
And maybe they're factoring in, the supply issues Williams was having before.
Yeah, that could be.
And his ability to perform within the constraints of that. But I don't know. That one just kind of threw me for a loop. I would have expected to maybe see not Kevin Magnussen, because again, when he's on, he's on. When he's off, he's way out there.
Yeah.
But maybe even Daniel Ricciardo, who's done better.
Yeah.
So let's look now through the fantasy Formula One lens.
Okay.
Let's do top 5.
And I'm going to go ahead and throw some caveats as to why I think these numbers are soft or light or whatever.
Oh, sure.
All right. So Max Verstappen.
So can you really say he's number 1? Because we've been advising people, and we've been drinking our own Kool-Aid here, that you don't take Max Verstappen because of that prohibitive cost.
Yeah.
So Actually, let me walk us back a little bit here. Can you tell me what are the key stats that you're looking at to make your evaluation? Because I know one is how many points he's garnering you
Mhm.
per $1 million spent. Each of these drivers are several $1 million a piece. You're looking at that return on investment. You also have to weigh in that startup cost of the driver.
And from a racing perspective, how often they finish in the top 10 and the
Okay.
top 6, because the points you get exponentially drop off in fantasy world and in real world.
Yes.
For qualifying, you get 10 points for first place, then -1 point all the way down to 10th place.
Okay.
So it's pretty
so linear.
It's a
Yeah.
linear. Fine. For the races, you get 25 points for the first place,
Mhm.
then 18, then 15, then 12. Third and fourth, you get 2 more points than your one driver who won.
Yep.
If you have second and third, you get 8 more points than if you had one driver who won.
So if you have first and fifth, that gets you 35 points. If you have
Yep.
second and third, that gets you 33 points.
Exactly.
Gotcha. So six.
yeah.
So 6 is kind of that dead zone.
6 is kind of that dead
You
zone,
you will still get some points, but it's not going to be at nearly as impactful.
which is why as soon as you have McLaren and Mercedes right now that are constantly getting in the top 6, Max Verstappen wins, got it. Good job, bud.
Yep.
If P2 through P5 are all McLaren and Mercedes, and you have both of those constructors, you're racking up a whole lot of points.
Right.
Boku points. If you had Max Verstappen to win and all the other people you can afford get P7 or less, there's going to be some points there. Anybody who has P2, P3, and P4, P5 constructors,
That's all the points.
that's all the points.
Yep.
When Russell got his DQ, he went from getting 25 points for winning, plus however many points he got for passing people and for whatever. So call it, he went from positive 30 to negative 25. Call it a 55-point swing.
Yeah.
Mercedes, the constructor, went from positive 30 for him to negative 25. So as soon as Russell got that one DQ, that was over 100 fantasy points. Tens of thousands of globally ranked positions.
Oh, it's the classic case of how much do you believe in your two drivers, and are you willing to put all your eggs in that basket?
As soon as Max Verstappen just is out raced, and it's a track that really works well for pick your Mercedes, then you're spending $10 additional million to get less points than you would if you'd gotten a Mercedes.
Well, and that's why we, up until this point, we've believed in Max, but not Red Bull anymore, because you're not getting that 2-car performance.
Is he the number 1 ranked fantasy player? Yes. Will I call him my power rank number 1? No.
Okay.
The number 1 power rank is Lando Norris.
And so this is really interesting that I think is specific to fantasy.
Yeah.
Is we're picking Lando Norris because of his slightly more affordable price point.
Yes.
His consistent high performance, but he is only as important as he is because he has Oscar Piastri. If you want to maximize the impact of a driver like Lando Norris, you also want the constructor.
Correct.
But you only want that constructor if the other driver is a solid performer.
Absolutely.
So Lando is number 1, but Lando is number 1 in no small part because of Oscar Piastri being his teammate.
So anybody listening about this and they're like, well, why is Lando Norris a contributing factor to Lando Norris getting you good fantasy points? Why is it his teammate? And the reason is that's one less car on the track he has to compete with.
Yeah.
And you might think, well, I'm going to watch them. No, they'll race it out. Yeah, they will. But there's also team orders. It impacts the teams picking strategies, picking pit stops, picking all this. It really does impact.
We have now also seen star of the show Lando Norris also follow orders,
which is huge.
Yeah, that hasn't been a factor for Red Bull because there's such a disparity between Max and Sergio Perez. We have seen the opposite of that with Ferrari. So that level of cooperative support that you're seeing from McLaren with 2 high-level drivers is a very powerful thing.
With Ferrari and with Mercedes, a lot of times these two guys are coming up on each other on merit.
Yeah.
It's not because, hey, man, this is our strategy. You guys are 1-2. Oh, wait, now just going to swap the order. It's not. You have somebody coming up on somebody else going like, hey, man, let me pass. Don't put me into the wall. And the other guy's like, no, I got to here. You have to try and pass me. It helps for fantasy, helps for power rankings unless you put each other into the wall.
Which does happen too.
Which does.
But so I'm going to go rabbit trail real quick.
Sure, let's do it.
That's what makes Haas so fascinating this year is, you have a lower tier team. So there are 3 to 4 teams in any given year where the drivers are trying where the drivers are trying to secure their job security for the
Yeah.
next year or audition for a higher tier team. So
Yeah.
to see the level of cooperation and teamwork between Kevin Magnussen and Nico Hulkenberg, and for them to score points on a semi-regular basis is so impressive and so anomalous.
The teams get money based on constructor, where they land in the constructor rankings.
Yep.
0 money for driver rankings.
Oh, gotcha.
Yeah.
So
So the drivers, they don't care if you're, I mean, yes, there's a whole lot of probably advertising and stuff like that come in as soon as you're high on the driver rankings. But as far as FIA giving you money for congratulations, you won, only comes from how well the team is. Yeah.
so yeah, next year is going to be very
Be
interesting.
super
So
cool for Haas.
Get back to our list here.
Get back to
so
the power
we're
rankings.
saying Lando Norris is number 1 for fantasy.
I think he is. He's the best balance of strong performance with price. He's about a little under 100 fantasy points behind Max Verstappen, and a lot of those have been earned recently. So
Yeah.
he's doing well.
And if you're just picking him up at this point in the season, he's gotten very expensive. But if he was much less proven at the beginning of the year because we were
Yeah.
kind of going, $24 million, but that's quite a bit less than Max was.
Yeah.
And at the time though, you could have gotten Lando Norris and 2 decent constructors.
Yeah.
So the value prospect, the value was there.
On to the number 2 in the power rankings.
Yeah.
Megan, Max Verstappen, he's a strong driver. He can't be high on that. He's not going to be in the top 5 just because of his cost.
Correct. Yeah, that's too limiting of a factor.
So then I'm not going to put Oscar Piastri on there, man. And I might be eating my hat here in the next couple weeks. As soon as he keeps crushing it, I'm not going to be surprised if he's crushing it.
Yeah.
Oscar Piastri is still the second driver.
Yep.
And I want to look and see who the number 1 drivers are for the different teams. Ferrari, I'm not putting them in the number 2 spot, because they've had car issues.
They had a really solid start to the year. There's just been issue after issue, and other constructors have caught up either even or ahead of them.
Yeah, and so this year I would have to say the number 2 driver is one of the Mercedes drivers.
I would agree, and
if it wasn't for Russell's DQ that cost me 100 fantasy points on every team I had that had him without the use of DRS, just straight up, I would say it's Russell. Is it Lewis Hamilton?
I think it will be Hamilton by the end of the year.
Okay.
I think looking at the first half of the season, Russell is the de facto answer from a value and point yielding perspective. What's his points per million?
Points per million, 0.74 George Russell, 0.87 for Lewis Hamilton.
And I think that's really skewed over the last 2 weeks.
I completely agree.
So if we're ignoring the last 2 weeks, and again, this is George Russell being in a car that happened to be 3 pounds too light outside of his control.
Yeah.
And he otherwise would have had a win.
100 points swing.
Correct.
For your fantasy team.
So that's why I justify Russell as number 2.
Yeah, I completely agree.
Cool.
So with Lando Norris number 1, George Russell number 2, I have to give it to Lewis Hamilton or Oscar Piastri.
See, this is where I would go cumulative total so far.
Yeah.
Charles Leclerc is still at 0.99 points per million.
He is.
And he's
same price as Oscar Piastri.
Correct. Looking at the cumulative performance from week 1 to week now, I have to go Charles Leclerc.
And
if they can hammer out their issues, they're still Ferrari.
They're still Ferrari.
They spent several weeks as the clear number 2 constructor.
As soon as they do get a result, Ferrari is going to start taking points away from Mercedes. Ferrari is going to start taking away points from Oscar Piastri and half of McLaren. So I really do feel that Lando Norris is relatively not untouchable, but he's relatively a safe bet.
Mm-hmm.
But as soon as Ferrari figures it all out, the points they're taking away from are your Mercedes and your Oscar Piastri.
For me, it becomes a little bit more of a debate in terms of 4 and 5 with Oscar Piastri and Lewis Hamilton. Moving forward, I'm on the Hamilton train.
Yeah.
But up till this point, Piastri's been solid. My full McLaren teams have been solid.
Yes.
They've been strong. And the fact that you can go full McLaren and McLaren constructor and still build out the rest of your roster with more than terrible drivers has been amazing. So I think my top 5 would be Norris, Russell, Leclerc, Piastri, Hamilton.
I could see that.
Again,
going into the next,
I see Hamilton climbing. Sure.
And we might have to rewind to this point and realize, man, what were we doing? Not jumping all in on Piastri.
Oh yeah.
For anybody who played last season, man, you had to have your Red Bull, you had your Red Bull constructors, your Red Bull drivers, and it all came down to who you could afford for the rest of the spots.
Yeah.
I don't think you're wrong if you put Mercedes on your team. I don't think you're wrong if you put McLaren on your team. Get those guys in there. Maybe if you're feeling a little gambly, get Charles Leclerc. Get Charles Leclerc on there. That's all I got. Any parting shots or saved rounds from you?
No, give us that like and subscribe, and the 5 stars if you're feeling generous. We'd love that. And thanks for hanging out with us.
All right, cheers.
All right.